Hello, I'm Dr. Ahmed Abdelal, and we are going to speak about phonation today. This is the second unit in the anatomy and physiology for speech, language, and hearing for students of speech language pathology. So, in the previous unit, we spoke about respiration. And the entire purpose of respiration is to enable us to get the energy source for speech. And when you inhale, fill up, fill your lungs up with air, then the process will be reversed, and then you start to exhale. As you exhale, you close the vocal folds on top of the airway, which is in the larynx. You close the airway by valving the vocal folds, and the pressure of the air as it is exiting the lungs and exiting the trachea is going to force the edges of the vocal folds, force them apart. And the vocal folds will try to come back again to close again. And that continuous resistance is basically producing sound waves. We call these sound waves phonation or vibration or voice. So we are going to look at the phonatory system and see how it exactly generates voice, and look at the anatomy and the physiology of the larynx and all the structures. But for now, see how the larynx is positioned. This is the trachea, and we discussed it as part of the respiratory system. And on top of the trachea, you have the laryngeal mechanism sitting on the trachea. And inside of the trachea, inside of the larynx, see that V shape, that is called the thyroid notch. And there's a little protrusion. You can feel it when you put your finger here, especially if you go put your finger on your chin and trace it down to that area here that is protruding in your neck. It's called Adam's apple sometimes. It is more prominent in males than in females, but both males and females have it. So this right beneath the thyroid notch, that V notch, right beneath it, the vocal folds originate, and they go posteriorly, and they attach to two cartilages. And the two cartilages, it's like this. One will be attaching here and one here, and when the two cartilages are swung together, they close the vocal folds and hold them. And then the air is going to stream through them, between them, and then that will generate the vibration. So the respiratory system gives you the power, or kind of the source of the energy, which is air, that is going to cause that vibration. The larynx, as it is in the center of the neck, it is anchored in place by a number of muscles that originate above it, and they come down and insert onto different parts. And these muscles, when they contract, they lift up the larynx. And there are some muscles that have origins below the larynx, and they kind of course superiorly and attach onto the larynx. And when they contract, they pull it down. I want you to feel that movement. If you put your finger on your larynx here and swallow, see what happens. First, your larynx is going to lift up, and it will go forward, up and forward. These are two movements. And we'll look at the muscles that enable it to perform this movement on a regular basis, and also the muscles that will move the vocal folds to the midline and away from the midline. So phonation is producing sound waves by the vocal folds. And another term for phonation is voicing. Phonation, all it does, all that the larynx does, it gives you a buzz, similar to like a balloon. When you have a balloon and blow the balloon up, and then you hold the neck of the balloon and stretch, and you notice that a sound is going to come out, a buzz will come out. All that the phonatory system gives you is this, it's a buzz. And that buzz, as the air from that buzz streams through the vocal tract, oral cavity, nasal cavity, then the articulators, organs of speech, are going to chop the air as it's going out, and it segments it into individual sounds and words. So phonation doesn't mean speech. Phonation is producing the buzz, and articulation or speech is the articulation of the air as it is going out, exiting the airway, and that is called speech articulation. So remember, the energy source for phonation is the air that comes from expiration. So here, the vocal folds give you, they are positioned on top of the trachea and inside of the larynx. And that is the only opening that leads into your airway. So when you close the vocal folds, you have no way of getting air into your lungs and no way of making air exit your lungs once you close the vocal folds. So you can presume that when you are not speaking, or say pushing or diving, that your vocal folds are swung open like this, a V shape. So this is the breathing mode. And you could see here one of the cartilages. There's another one on the other side. This is called the arytenoid cartilage. There's another one here, and the arytenoid is kind of like a little pyramid, and it has a process or a piece where the vocal fold connects. But the arytenoid can be swung in and out. It rotates, or it is made to rotate by some muscles that connect onto it. So when it rotates inward, it will bring the vocal folds to the midline, and it will do this. So these are the arytenoids now are rotated, and the vocal folds are brought to the midline. So this is the posterior view, the posterior aspect of the vocal folds. This is the anterior. So when you touch your larynx, right behind your finger, you will find the thyroid notch, and below it, you find the two vocal folds are going to be originating right there. Each one is going to course posteriorly, and it will insert onto one arytenoid. When the arytenoids are rotated inward, they will bring the two vocal folds to the midline, and thus they close the vocal folds. And then the air will stream, because the air pressure, when you close the vocal folds, the air pressure will build up beneath them, and it will force the edges, the medial edges of the vocal folds, it will push them away from the center. And then the vocal folds want to come back again, just like two rubber bands. If you stretch them, two rubber bands, and you take one away, you let go, it will be coming back to its rest position. So that is the mutual resistance between the elasticity of the vocal folds and the air pressure. That is what keeps the cycle of phonation going. When you perform exercise, you need automatically the arytenoids will be abducted or opened further, because when you perform exercise, your your metabolic system is going to require more energy, because the muscles are metabolizing energy. And how to get that, to get this energy, you will have to increase the oxygen supply by taking in more air. And by the only way you can do it is by opening the vocal folds farther, so you can take greater amounts of air and get more oxygen from that. So again, phonation means voicing. The term phoneme is similar. It comes from the word phonation, and both of them come from the word phone. Phone is a Latin word that means sound, but it can be any sound at all. Sound of a bird, a car, and so on. But phoneme is a speech sound. So, for example, the English language has 26 letters. Letters are to be read. These are graphemes. So the graphemes are only 26. However, when you think about sounds, not how they are written, you think about phonemes. Each sound is unique, and the English language has 43 different sounds. So the sounds of the English language are divided into two groups. One group is called voiced sounds, and one is called voiceless sounds. Commonly, when we say voiced, we say V plus, and voiceless, we say V minus. So voiced means that the vocal folds vibrate when you make that sound. And voiceless, it means that the vocal folds do not have any activity. So let's take, for example, a couple of sounds. Say S, and now say it and hold your larynx and say S. You are not going to feel anything. You shouldn't feel anything in your larynx, no movement, no vibration, because the sound is coming from contact between the tongue tip and the space called the alveolar ridge. However, do the same sound, but say zzz, and you can feel the vibration when you say zzz. So s is a voiceless sound, z is a voiced sound. Why do we call it voiced? Because the vocal folds are vibrating when you make that sound. So, as a rule, voiceless sounds have a single source of articulation, and that most of the voiceless sounds are produced in the oral cavity, except for a couple of voiceless sounds that are produced by the vocal folds themselves when they come close enough, close but not close enough to vibrate, so that, like as in high, so no vibration, but a puff of air exits between the vocal folds. So that is one sound. Another one is when you say ka and ba, and the vocal folds do not vibrate. They just slam against each other and go away. So, but most of the sounds are the voiceless sounds are produced in the oral cavity, like s, t, k, and so on. And then voiced sounds have two sources of phonation. Two sources of sound or noise. One is in the oral cavity, that is always voiceless, and the other source is vocal fold vibration. So when I say zzz, there is voiceless sound coming from the oral cavity, and there's voicing coming from the vocal fold vibration. So by nature, voiced sounds involve two sources of phonation. The larynx has two biological functions that are survival functions, and then it has a third function that is more of an overlaid function, more of a secondary function. The first function is to protect the airway from anything that can penetrate and go in and harm our life. For example, when you eat when you swallow, your vocal folds automatically close. Because they do not, and there's any problem with the epiglottis that covers them, anything that escapes in between the vocal folds will cause you to choke and to cough and all of this. So it's a protective valve. And every time you swallow, right as soon as the food starts to leave your mouth, the vocal folds will close and will be covered by the epiglottis. It enables us to expel things that go in, that happen to penetrate. So, for example, if a droplet of water goes down, you just close the vocal folds and build up pressure beneath and just cough or sneeze and forcefully expel whatever is beneath the vocal folds. So that is protection of our lives. And then thoracic fixation is a second function. When you notice yourself, when you want to pull something or push, automatically you are going to hold your breath. Holding your breath means closing the vocal folds. If you dive, you are going to have to close the vocal folds. So the third function is as a sound generator, as a voicing mechanism. Since we already have the larynx performing functions of survival, we are adapting it. We use it for an additional function that is a secondary function. But some people do not have to use it, like people who have their larynx taken out, for example. They can live without that. People who use sign language, deaf, they don't have to use it. They can survive. Of course, not using the larynx and not having it makes life harder. However, living is possible. So speech or sound production is a secondary or overlaid function for the laryngeal mechanism and for the vocal tract itself. So these are three functions. Two of them are biological and survival functions, and one is the overlaid function of sound generation or producing sound. So when we study the larynx, we look first at the anatomical structure, first the skeletal framework that holds it together, that gives it the structure that it has. First you have the trachea, and the trachea, as it goes down, 16 to 19 cartilage rings, and then it goes into the thorax, and it branches off into two branches called bronchi, and each bronchus leads to one lung. So on top of the trachea, you have one big solid ring called the cricoid cartilage, and that serves as the base and the foundation of the larynx. So the cricoid cartilage is the foundation, and it is a major part of the larynx, and it sits right on top of the trachea. And then you have the thyroid cartilage, that big piece that you can touch here, sitting on top of the cricoid. And inside of the thyroid, you have the vocal folds, and there are muscles inside and outside that can modulate the movement of the vocal folds and the movement of the larynx itself. But the larynx, as it is positioned in the neck, it has a set of muscles, basically 4 muscles that originate above it and come down and insert onto different parts of it. So this way, when they contract, they elevate it and tip it forward. And there is a set of muscles that originate below and rise to insert onto the larynx. When these muscles contract, they pull the larynx down. So these, we're going to discuss them. These are called extrinsic laryngeal muscles. The larynx is also connected to the base of the tongue, also from above, and also to the sternum through the muscles I mentioned that rise from below. Inside of the larynx, there is a mucous membrane smooth, slippery membrane. Notice the spelling of the word mucus. If it is mucou, that means it is flesh, it is epithelium, it's an epithelial membrane. If you take the O out and you say mucus, that means the fluid that comes out, that sticky substance. So it is important to know the difference between the spelling of mucus and with cus and mucus with cous. So the larynx consists of 5 major, and I emphasize the word major, 5 major cartilages and 2 pairs of small cartilages and the single bone, that is the hyoid bone. So again, the muscles that there's a set of muscles that move some of these cartilages so that they can bring the vocal folds together and seal them so that you can produce speech. So here is the larynx, the trachea, and on top of the trachea you have the vocal fold. You have the larynx, sitting on top of the trachea. The vocal folds are inside of the larynx. The space between the vocal folds is called the glottis. The V-shaped space between the vocal folds is called the glottis. And of course now, here's the pharynx, the space inside of your neck, and then the oral cavity, and then the nasal cavity. The pharynx, the oral cavity, and the nasal cavity make up the vocal tract. Now I want to attract your attention to this. Here is the larynx, the trachea. You can touch it here, and the larynx on top. Now behind the trachea and behind the larynx, there is the esophagus. So when you eat, chew, and then the food goes into the pharynx, and then it goes down. There's this